So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's watching. And on behalf of Middle East Insights, the International Dialogue Series, we have Victor J. Willi with us. And Dr. Willi is going to talk about the changing geopolitics of the Middle East. Though his expertise and his knowledge cannot be summed up in a small introduction, but I'm going to do this injustice. Dr. Victor J. Willi is a thought leader and expert on the Middle East, a former director and global leadership fellow at the World Economic Forum. He has earned a PhD in history from University of Oxford and published a seminal book on Egyptian politics with Cambridge University Press. The Fourth Ordeal, A History of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, 1968 to 2018, which was published with Cambridge University Press. He has over 25 years of experience in research, economic development, and political risk analysis, and currently acts as a strategic advisor for clients from the private and public sectors, helping them to navigate the complexities of Middle East and the Global South. He is also a Marie Curie European Union Fellow at Foscari University in Venice, working on a project in Syria. He teaches at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna and is the executive director of the Middle East Institute, Switzerland, the first Swiss think tank advisory firm for Middle East and the Global South, which he has founded and leads. He is fluent in English, German, French, Arabic, and is currently learning Chinese. This is your inspirational bucket list. So with this, sir, welcome to our podcast, and thank you so much for the privilege of your time.
Thank you very much.
And my first question to you is that how do you judge the recent Iran-Israel war in a historical perspective?
I would say, well, a useful concept that we can use here from the discipline of history to answer this question is that of a turning point, right? Historians have the habit of identifying certain turning points in history, which were, of profound significance. And I would say that the Iran-Israel war was not such a turning point, but I will explain why it wasn't. First of all, I need to say that turning points are usually judged, towards the past. So we cannot really say at the moment, usually in history, whether something is a turning point or not. But some events are immediately evident as such turning points. One example was September 11, just because of the magnitude and the, sophistication of this attack and how little expected it was. Another such turning point was the Arab Spring of 2011, where millions of people across the Arab world went to the streets. A third such turning point, I would say, is October 7, 2023. And the Iran-Israel war stands within the umbrella, is under the umbrella of this turning point. But on a symbolic level, I think what, policymakers in Israel and America try to do is to label it such a turning point in that they called it the 12th-day war, which of course is an analogy of the Six-Day War of 1967, which is another turning point in terms of the history of the Arab world. It was a turning point because, we saw a complete defeat of the Arab armies. A significant new territory was conquered by Israel, including the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan Heights. It led to a deep crisis in the Arab world, an ideological crisis, and it was followed by another war, sort of a redemption war, the Ramadan War, or the Yom Kippur War, as the Israelis call it. And the 12th-day war did not have that sort of significance, right? Because at best we can say that it was a reset of the nuclear program of Iran. At worst, we can say it was a complete failure because, frankly, the regime is still there. The nuclear program has been set back, but it's still there. Khamenei was not ousted. The regime has not changed. So, in terms of my judgment as a historian of the recent Israel Iran war. It was significant, but it was not as significant as these other turning points I mentioned for the reasons I mentioned.
Yeah. And when you look at the recent Iran-Israel war, what do you think were the implications of the war on both Iran as well as Israel?
Well, for Iran, for Iran, it's sort of like actually emboldened the leadership or the Islamic Republic, because it led to a significant wave of Iranian nationalism and actually strengthened the regime support, because this is very obvious, when an outside enemy comes and attacks you, you're going to rally with your leadership, even though you may hate these leaders, but you're going to rally against the external enemy. And like the attacks on important national monuments like the Iranian TV station. Also, I don't know the exact death toll, but it was maybe between 600, maybe 1,000, maybe more, which is significant. All that had a significant impact on the Iranian national disposition. Also, Iran is a country of 92 million people, so and resistance is part of the DNA, so to speak, of the Islamic Republic. So it strengthened that sort of instinct of resistance. And what it will probably lead to is that Iran will expand its asymmetric warfare strategy in various countries, such as Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, potentially Syria, which will lead to more instability in these countries. It was also interesting in terms of the Iranian-Israeli exchange that, we saw a little bit of a tit for tat between interception on the side of Israel versus rockets on the side of Iran. And we saw that actually the Israeli interception system is exhausted, and the Iranians have significant rockets. And on the international level, I think it strengthened the consensus both in Russia and Pakistan and China, India, Turkey, other countries that they stand with Iran. So in terms of the strategic goals of Iran, which is keeping a nuclear deterrence and regime survival, that was the impact on that side. On Israel, it showed that, first of all, it showed that Israel cannot consolidate its victory or its theory of victory without the United States. And so this is a significant discovery. I mean, we knew that before, but that was one thing that became obvious. The war objectives were not achieved by Israel. Israel wanted nuclear deterrence and wanted to eliminate the Iranian nuclear program, so that was not achieved. And the strategic goals of Israel were not, achieved as well. Besides nuclear capabilities, regime change. So the theory of victory of Israel has not worked. Israel had no way to win. It probably wanted to have a victory like the Six-Day War, but it did not really have a way to win, precisely because it needed the United States in order to win. And so even if the centrifuges are destroyed to some extent, the Iranians will just rebuild them. So I would say, although this was celebrated as a victory on the part of Israel, I would say that it's actually the Iranians that took the upper hand from this latest confrontation.
And how do you see, like right now, the American administration as well as the Israeli administration has given a 60-day ceasefire proposal. So over the period of after 7th of October, in the past 20 months and more, how do you see the role of Hamas?
You mean Hamas? Well, Hamas is, you cannot kill a Godzilla. And Hamas, I remember in the first day, the sort of war, the war call of the Israelis was, we have to eliminate the Hamas. But here we are almost 2 years later, and Hamas is alive and well. I mean, of course, they don't have the same capabilities anymore as they had before, but they're still causing significant damage on the Israelis in Gaza. And it is impossible, frankly. And people who know these kind of organizations and who knew Hamas said that from the beginning. It is not possible to eliminate an organization like Hamas, because Hamas ultimately is an ideology. Hamas ultimately is deeply embedded within Palestinian society. The cause of Hamas will be strengthened further. The more this war in Gaza continues, this genocide continues. Hamas is, I wouldn't say alive and well, but it's impossible to eliminate Hamas unless you literally eliminate the whole of the Palestinian population. This is not to say that every Palestinian is a member of Hamas, but it is to say that Hamas is deeply embedded, is a social, religious, political, military movement that is deeply embedded within society. Hamas comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, founded in 1928, similar, a social, religious reform movement, deeply embedded in society. But then, of course, in Gaza and in Palestine, it took a different turn. But in Gaza, the only options that the Israelis have is to continue their war, but there is no end in sight. I mean, there is no victory in sight for Israel. So if the elimination of Hamas is the declared a goal of Israel, then in my view, there is no victory in sight.
Yeah, and the Pyrrhic victory of Israel continues. But if we take a step back and try to understand what is happening around us, what does the Israel-Iran war tell us about the world that we are living in today?
Well, I think the main thing that this war tells us about our world today is that that we live in an international system and in an international environment where there is no international law anymore. I mean, the attack of Israel and then on the United States and Iran was a classical breach of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. And a breach that would, in other circumstances, cause significant outrage. But today we're living really in a Hobbesian international order, where countries can just attack other countries with impunity. Added to this is the, shifting geopolitical context. What we often hear is that notion of multipolarity, or maybe we should say multipolarities in the plural. A sort of a contestation of the multilateral system of Bretton Woods, that is, by the way, contested both by the Trump MAGA people, as well as by various powers in the global south who want, including India, who want to have a more fair and more just distribution. So in that context, we see the rise of BRICS. So back to your question, we really have a disintegration, a demise of international structures, a weakening of international law. The international community is shifting more and more from a rules-based order to a power-based order. And this is, by the way, not only something that is taking place, in my view, on the level of power and politics, but it also takes place on a more sort of superstructural, epistemological, or even philosophical level, in the sense of the normativity. We kind of live today in this post-truth, post-fact order where, there is no real, even the notion of truth is not really valid anymore. It's now truth in the plural. Everybody has their own little truth. I mean, this is sort of like a fragmentation of sort of like the epistemological space where, and then of course, the worst thing of this is that, back to your question, is that that an NPT member was attacked by a non-NPT member states. And so this brings then, of course, the discussion back to nuclearization and, nuclear weapons, etc. And even there, we have a fragmentation of the sort of like international arms regime. And so this, coupled with the lack of normativity, coupled with lack of common standards, coupled with the erosion of international law, leads indeed to a very, very dangerous situation today.
Yeah. And as we are having the podcast today, the BRICS meeting is going to happen in Brazil. And Indian Prime Minister Modi is also going to Brazil in a couple of days. Along with it, in US, Trump is trying to pass the big, beautiful bill. So when it comes to United States, how do you see the role of US now in this world of multipolarities?
I mean, the U.S. basically what was impressive, what this Congress was nowhere to be seen. I mean, according to the U.S. Constitution, Congress has the power to declare war, and of course the president controls the military as the commander in chief, but it's not supposed to initiate a war without congressional approval. This was something we saw in this war. I mean, I should also say this is not. There is also precedent for that. I mean, Trump is not the first president who attacked another country without congressional approval. We saw similar events at the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, for example, in Vietnam, or the Reagan's approval of airstrikes on Libya in 1986, after the disco bombing in Berlin. As well as, I mean, also Trump himself when he ordered the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in Iraq in 2020. So that was this sort of like one-sided and unilaterally decided move to go attack another country. That's definitely a characteristic that is specific about the America of today. And but the other thing that we also see is that there is not much of a policymaking process anymore in Washington today. I mean, the Doge department fired a lot of people, but even if, regardless of people being fired or not, there is not much of an interagency process. There is not much of a consultation with embassies. That would have been the traditional way of American foreign policy making, and it would be the traditional way of the foreign policy making of any country, really. But today you just have basically Trump and a small group of advisors. I think it's really very small group, maybe only 3 or 4 people who are basically calling the shots, and they don't really use the bureaucracy anymore. Previously, you had months of interagency meetings and deliberations, etc., also to see what adversaries say, what allies say. This is all kind of gone. And maybe the third point that I can add is that the U.S. is just a very unpredictable power today. We saw that, for example, in the Gulf on Trump's recent visit, where everybody begged him not to do it, and but anyway, he went away and did it anyway. So this sort of unpredictability, which is very specific to Donald J. Trump, I think is a third characteristic I would say here.
Yeah. I think most of the times it is said that Trump is transactional, but I think that he is unsatiable, that he cannot be satisfied with whatever decisions he takes. So he often goes back into the opposite of it. So, yeah. But what do you think is now, since we have talked about US, so what do you think is European Union doing? What is the role of European Union now in today's world?
Well, if we talk on the geopolitical level, I don't really see the European Union to be a geopolitical player. I mean, some countries in Europe are probably still geopolitical players when it comes to certain regions, though the whole European Union is sort of like a crisis, the way I see it. I mean, the basic problem of the European Union is that it has no army. So it cannot be a geopolitical player if it has no army. And the reason why it has no army is because it has no united position, right? Because the European Union is composed of national countries, And these national countries, they differ in terms of their prioritization when it comes to migration, when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, when it comes to Iran. So that's the fundamental problem of the European Union. It's highly fragmented position. We saw that in this initiative of the E3, which really had zero effect, because while they were negotiating with Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, at the same time Trump sent off the B-2 to bomb Fardo anyway. So. This just shows the impotence of the European Union and of European countries. I mean, then the EU also, when it comes to Iran, the EU has really lost all leverage with Iran in the JCPOA. They still played, an important role, but today they lost the three key functions that the European Union should have are gone, which was from the Iranian perspective, which was the ability to influence Washington. So that was, or also, the ability to serve as an export market for Iran. After the JCPOA withdrawal, the EU kind of made a lot of noise about its economic potential. And its ability to provide Iran with economic benefits, but the EU and the US economic ties were much stronger, so that the commercial motive didn't make a lot of sense for the Iranians. So they lost their economic influence, and then finally, and perhaps most importantly, they don't have any ability to influence Israel in any way. Or put any guardrails or red lines on Israeli military action. So, from the Iranian perspective, and from the perspective of this war, they lost all relevance. And then, of course, there is the issue of Gaza. I mean, ask anybody in the global South or in the Middle East, etc., about the European position. I mean, I frankly don't understand how they can even take themselves seriously. And, there is an obvious dichotomy or, contradiction between, Russia, Ukraine versus Iran, Palestine or Gaza. In one case, these norms are applied. And in the other case, the argument is just completely reversed. Like, I don't understand how anybody in the European Union can even believe their own positions. They're so controversial. They so lack every logic. So yeah, I don't think the days of the European Union are very good. I mean, and I don't see them as being a relevant political player anymore whatsoever, at least not at that stage.
Yes, and especially now in one of the TV interviews also, when I was asked about how the Iran-Israel war is going to be very unsafe for the Jewish diaspora abroad and all of it. And I said that whatever, the acrimony that is happening towards the Israeli state, especially Netanyahu or the IDF, is not happening because of Iran. It's mostly because of Gaza. And that is the entire consumption of death that has, for the past 48 hours, more than 150 people have been killed. And it has become such a regular, more than 3 lakhs have gone missing. The consumption or normalization of human life is completely Orwellian in today's world. But my coming to when we are talking about European Union and we are talking about United States, how do you see, what did Iran-Israel war mean for Russia and China? Because both of them have heavy investments in Iran. Both of them have supported Iran because of their own real politics. There is the idea of making Iran as the Eurasian hub, the idea of nuclear scientists going and training and investing, the Russian nuclear scientists going and investing in Iran. They're investing in another nuclear plant. China is having a rail route also from Xi'an to Iran now. So what is How do you see this
So
asymmetry?
yeah, so I mean, let's start with Russia perhaps. So in 2022, right, when Russia came under sanctions and the war was just started in Ukraine, I would say that the relations were more balanced and in favor of Iran actually than they are now, because Russia asked Iran for help in the Security Council, but once this destruction of Hezbollah and the collapse of Bashar al-Assad in Syria set in, more and more, Iran, the relationship changed a little bit more, and Iran became more dependent on Russia. So this is where we were in 2022. And then there was, during the last few years, Iran supplied Russia with drones, with sophisticated drone technology. But in the meantime, Russia has pretty much localized the production of Iranian drones within Russia. And so they don't really need Iran anymore from the perspective of the war, or from the logic of the war. And even though in the short term, when Iran got attacked, Russia scored some points because the oil price was higher, now it has deflated. And there was also the Iranian-Russian agreement of 2025. I think it was January 2025, which provides for it's a wide-ranging agreement with very general provisions. However, other than, for example, the Russian-North Korean agreement, there is no Article 5 type clause in that contract. By that I mean like a defense clause, the mutual defense clause that we have in NATO. Article 5 refers to NATO. So I think, Russia is not that dependent on Iran anymore as it used to be a few years ago. And so I would not say that, I would not say that the war in Iran has greatly impacted Russia. We also have not really seen much of an impact in terms of the battlefield in Ukraine. Now, when it comes to China, that's a different case because, as you know, China is a resource poor country generally. So China relies on energy imports from Iran. Actually, 15% of Chinese crude oil imports come from Iran. And so China is Iran's largest oil customer, from in the Middle East, and also imports through sanctions evasion methods, such as ship-to-ship transfers or relabeling and other similar techniques. And in 2023, 2024, we have, I think the trade balance is about 15 to 20 billion annually. Of course, most of this is Iranian oil exports, but also China and Iran have a comprehensive strategic partnership. Iran is also a key country, a key node in China's Belt and Road Initiative. So for China, Iran has a much higher significance than Russia. And on top of this, China has significant investments in Iranian, not just in the energy sector, but also in infrastructure, in ports facilities, in railways, and telecom. So in various sectors, China is heavily invested in Iran. And so this is why I guess the decision makers in Beijing were that was a real moment of danger, because if the Strait of Hormuz would have been disrupted, the Chinese economy, which is already not doing very well, would have had some severe difficulties. And but there also were certain debates about the war in China. I know this from friends, because Chinese energy and infrastructure interests were weighted against American assets being divested from China. So yes, we're here in the game of geopolitics where different interests have to be weighed against each other.
Yeah, and but it's true that often the slow decline of the Chinese economy is not actually hitting the headlines because of the media censorship which is there. And This brings me to the next question, is that because we have now talked as state as the actors, what about now going to, like, talking about private companies, as you're a strategic advisor also for various private companies? What do you think in terms of investment, in terms of policy, in terms of future business engagements, and even B2B or B2C agenda that they have? What should the private companies be aware of when it comes to Middle East and geopolitics?
I think they would have to be aware of geopolitics itself. I mean, I think if you look at, for example, the front pages. I mean, I haven't done this research, scientifically, but I'm just thinking for anecdotal evidence. If you looked at the front page of the Financial Times like 10 years ago, it was all about X company invests so much shares in this, there is a merger and acquisition there, blah, blah, blah. If you look at the headlines of the FT today, it's just only geopolitics. I mean, it looks like any other newspaper now. It doesn't look like the Financial Times anymore. And this to me just signifies the growing importance of geopolitics on business. I mean, business leaders today, they have to be aware of geopolitics. Business, I don't know if you, for those of you with some experience in the private sector, but business are very usually by nature very focused on business topics and business numbers, bottom line, profit, etc. But today we live first of all, the supply chains are much more diversified and much more global, and a lot of this of course is happening in the Middle East. And this is where I think the business sector has to reschool itself to a certain extent, and to familiarize itself with politics, with geopolitics, with geoeconomics, and also with history. By the way, I would also say with history, because history is the non plus ultra study of geopolitics, if you will. So I think this is where business leaders should think today. They should look at risk, more broadly, and look at how geopolitical changes in the alliance system, or the shift towards multipolarity, or the global distribution of power, of how this impacts regulatory environments, supply chains, currency fluctuations. So yeah, we're living in this world where things are much more interconnected. It's much more difficult to compartmentalize specific areas. Even also the Middle East itself cannot be seen really as a region in and of itself anymore. Because today we cannot really understand the Middle East. During the Arab Spring, for example, you could look at the Middle East as this one region, and things were kind of more or less contained within this region. That Arab Spring was really like an Arab problem. There were no foreign, there were conspiracy theories about foreign elements, etc. But scientifically there wasn't. But today you cannot really speak about the Middle East anymore without speaking of China, speaking of India, speaking of Africa, speaking of Central America. All these factors influence politics in the Middle East, and the same is true for the corporate sector.
Yeah, and as you give the example of Financial Times and how the cover is almost everyday geopolitical, and your own experience of traveling to China, what do you think is the Chinese worldview right now? How does China look at the world?
Well, first of all, I think what we often forget when we talk about China is that China is really a very, very old civilization, and not only old civilization, it's also a very old state. The Chinese state, you have to realize this, was unified in 221 before Christ. So when you talk about the government of China today, then you really talk about a government that looks back towards 2,200 and something years of existence. And this means, administrative procedures. The Chinese state is huge, 30 or 40 million if you count all the regional governments, 30 or 40 million people. I mean, how do you even administer a state of that proportion? The other thing is we see China as a country, like Switzerland is a country, and China is also a country, in my view. But China is really not a nation state like many European states. China is really, and this is not my word, but China is a civilization state. Every province in China is its own country. You know, imagine Europe would be one country. Not just an abstract European Union, but one country. So when we look at China, we look at this massive size and these massive proportions and this huge, very old history. And I think this matters in the way how China looks into the world. And it also matters how China looks towards other old civilizations, such as Iran, such as Russia, all also very old countries with a sort of historical mission. And I think this matters in terms of international relations. And when we talk about international relations and geopolitics, we just, it's often very superficial. We talk about energy and, politics and security and these kind of topics. But what also matters is culture. The historical residue, the civilizational complexity of a country. And of course, you in India know that very well. Sorry, I forgot to mention you, but in your case, there is a problem with China. So that's why I didn't say anything. But what I want to say is that this long view matters. And I think this is how China looks at the world. China is playing a long game. China is still today not bragging too much with its development. And it's not just the government, it's also Chinese people. They don't go out and say, hey, look, we're so amazing. We have BYD and it's much better than Tesla. Actually, they still call themselves a developing country. I mean, you go to China, you go to Beijing, and then you go to Paris, and then you hear China calls itself a developing country. I mean, this is really like, I'm just saying that they're not like the United States where, being number one is really part of the national psyche, right? Americans, they need to be number one. And if they're not, then there's probably going to be a war. So they're holding themselves back. They're learning. They're very intelligent people, in my view. And this is the sort of like this modesty, this sort of wait and see. This is also probably the reason why they're not really want to fully get engaged more in world politics. They kind of do a little things here and there, like this Iran-Saudi deal in 2023, or when they called the Palestinian factions to Beijing to negotiate. So they mingle a little bit in politics, but not to a great extent. And so China is in a position of wait and see, in my view.
Yeah. And I do agree with you in terms of during my master's and during my other travels, when I met Chinese citizens, they have very less comparative brain drain. Most of them, after finishing their education, would want to return to their own country and work there. And the second thing is also what I noticed, that the entire rift between India and China specifically is more of a Western-centric construct. Because after the Galwan Valley incident, especially even during the Pahalgam terrorist attack, China had a very, very nuanced approach. And China condemned the attack, and it also opened up for more diplomacy. Yeah. So I think it's a Western lobbying effort to make India, China, which are two very old civilizational identities, into foes, which serves the Western agenda.
Absolutely, absolutely, I agree. And also what you say is true, that China, this sort of like appeal to international diplomacy and for multilateralism and the UN and these kind of institutions, it also comes from the resource constraint of China. I mean, I think this foreign policy is also part of the fact that China has limited resources. They need to have a cooperative international environment, and then it comes also from their historical tributary system, which was the historical, which was China kind of is used to. So yeah, it's I agree with you.
And also because BRICS is happening right now, and I researched a very interesting fact, which was that most often after the establishment of BRICS, BRICS often talks about condemning terrorism, but does not go into the specificity of it. So there were many BRICS meetings in all the nation states, but it was only in 2017 in China when, for the first time and the only time till now, when Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Haqqani Network, Al-Qaeda, ISIS were actually called with names and condemned. Otherwise, BRICS doesn't do that. So the entire idea that the trust deficit, which is happening, in my opinion, in Indians against China, is just the propaganda of the West.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because that is, it's.
I would love to talk more about this, by the way, because I've been to India a few times, but not for a while. But so I actually am losing a little bit the Indian views.
You should come over, and I'll we'll have long conversations on it.
Fantastic!
And,
I look forward to it.
And I now want to also, I should tell all of you that Sir has traveled, and he keeps traveling a lot. And his one of the most important travels was to Syria. So when you travel to Syria, Sir, and your academic work is also on Syria, what exactly is happening in Syria?
I mean, in Syria, so I mean, of course, we had this as the Financial Times and all the others called it, lightning offensive in December 2024. Everybody repeated that term. It was interesting. And then, of course, Assad, was removed, and then Trump came and lifted the sanctions, and now we have this moment of optimism and hope. Maybe now, finally, this country can be the beacon of, democracy and inclusivity. I'm not trying to be cynical about it, by the way, but I'm a little bit cynical towards the sort of Western perception of stylizing al-Shara into the new hero, sort of, that would bring enlightenment and sort of like an Islamist Immanuel Kant, who would now rule Syria and make everything towards the better. But there is a great chance. I think there is a unique opportunity because it is very rare, in my view, that you have a civil war, a long and brutal and horrible civil war, and then the dictator is toppled, and the new ruling coalition, within a few 3-4 months, 5 months, wins the support not only of all the major regional players, including the United Arab Emirates, including Saudi Arabia, but also the United States, Donald Trump, the American president, and then lifts the sanctions. So this is something remarkable, and this is definitely attributable to the skill and the talent of Ahmed al-Shara. But now that the sanctions are lifted, the question is what's the next step, right? Can we say Syria is now open for business? I don't think so, because first of all, there is two reasons: one, an internal reason and an external reason. And the external reasons has to do with the sanctions, because even though the sanctions have been lifted politically, there are still a lot of companies, especially banks and insurance companies, who have incorporated the sanctions regime within their internal regulations. And so these are usually more conservative entities. And they're not just because Trump lifts the sanctions by presidential decree, are also going to scrap their regulations and go after, because what happened in the JCPOA in Iran was a similar thing. So these companies are hesitant. They're traditionally conservative. So until the investment really flows, and you read in the headlines, Qatar investing so and so much, but there is still a lot of problems on the ground. For example, the airports, which are completely not fixed, which are completely they're still relying on Soviet era technology. So there is a lot of, as they say, the devil is in the detail. And so this is the problem with the sanctions. And then the other question is regarding the government. I mean, we now sort of crafted this narrative of Ahmad al-Shara and his people being pragmatists, right? Because this is kind of what we want. We want Islamists who are also pragmatists, not just dumb ideologists, but actual pragmatists like we see ourselves in the West. But is that actually true? And are we actually going to see inclusive and efficient economic and political institutions that are going to be created in Syria? And when we look at what happens now, we see that there are certain problems. For example, take the foreign fighters, which, for example, the Turkestan Islamist Party, which is from Xinjiang province in China. Some of these people who the Chinese see as bloodthirsty terrorists and separatists are now having positions in the military in Syria, even in the civil apparatus in Syria. So why am I saying this? Because this hinders trust, and this is not a pragmatist position. On the other hand, it's also clear why al-Shara cannot just kick all his brothers in arm out now that they have Damascus. So there is also a sense of loyalty of al-Shara to his own people. So there is a conflict between that element of loyalty that al-Shara has to his people and the sort of the idea of creating a trustworthy, investment safe environment. And so it will be seen, and I'm actually in my research want to look at how the shaping up of the governing coalition impacts the shape of the emerging state and all, including the economy. So it is not that simple to just say, oh, he's a pragmatist, we can trust him, let's throw in our money, let's build up Syria. I would love this to happen, right? But there is an internal complexity to it that is often that is often disregarded, or that is not talked about in the media. It is talked about in Syrian podcasts, etc., by locals, but it is still a story to be uncovered.
Yeah, and also the social contract that Ahmad al-Shara is going to have with the Alawites, with the Druze, the Kurds, the Christians. A lot of criticism is emerging in that sector and the other minorities. But again, there's various ways of manufacturing consent. And the second point that it also I think about is that a lot of human rights abuse that happened in Syria during Bashar al-Assad, there were so many Syrian diaspora members staying outside who were working on it. And if the social contract would take their help in bringing justice to the families that have been suffering from this human rights abuse. And the third is that I don't know how much of because Syria is divided into various pockets and a lot of different militias. So a lot of other militias have not given up their arms, even though the government called.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it is not going to be, it is never an easy transition in history and in politics. And, you always need to, I think if you are becoming a new ruling coalition, you need some sort of ideology. Okay, whether this ideology is Islamism or nationalism or a mix of the two or something else. But you need some sort of, some glue to form a new story. You need to craft a new story. And yes, Syria has been a country that has been through a brutal civil war. and there is different factions, there is different ethnicities. So it's not going to be an easy path forward.
Yes.
And we can just hope that we can hope that Ahmed al-Shara is actually this talented man that we perceive him to be. He seems to be a very talented man himself. But we can also hope that there is no other country that is trying, or that the regional events are not going to impact the story of Syria going forward.
I have my cognitive dissonance about Ahmed al-Shara. I somehow think that he's a Trojan horse and with a expiry date. So I don't know how true that will prove to be. But
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm saying this is because if you look at his path, he went to Al Qaeda. I think he was driven by pragmatic moves, not by so much he himself, not so much by ideological moves, because he's a bit of a chameleon.
yeah,
He goes here and now here, and then all of a sudden he's meeting Trump. I mean, who would have said that an ISIS man and an Al Qaeda man would meet Donald Trump? I mean, this is like from a movie. So this is why I'm thinking that he's just an incredibly smart guy. But whether he's a good guy, that remains to be seen.
yes. And talking about Syria in this context, do you think that as Trump has announced that Syria and Lebanon are going to sign the Abraham Accords, so especially with Syria, do you think that Syria will recognize Israel and give up Golan Heights?
I think. I mean, I don't. I think the Iranian Syria conversation is more about security and not about Abraham. I mean, I don't know. I think this is a bit of a media. I could be wrong, but we never know in this region. That's the thing. All kinds of crazy things can happen any time in this region, but I don't see it very likely that al-Shara is now going to brother up with Netanyahu after all this disaster in Gaza. I mean, I don't see it happening personally. I could be wrong.
His name is Jolani, coming from Golan Heights, and then he gives up
Right.
Golan Heights. So, but I still believe that he's the Trojan horse of who is keeping his cool till the time comes. So let's see how true is that. And
That's actually maybe even a good thing about Trump, because he has this more isolationist instinct, although he then lashes out once in a while and sends a B-2 bomber or something. But yeah, a lot of the problems in this world are really caused by this idea of trying to export your ideology somewhere.
yeah, so that is there. And also when in this post-truth era, so when we live in a reality where everything is so binary, good versus bad, terrorism versus emancipation, chosen land or I don't know what's the other alternative to it.
Unchosen land.
Unchosen land. So there's so much of polarization in the narrative. How do scholars make sense of the world that we are in?
I don't know how scholars make sense of the world. But I mean, if you ask me, I agree with you. This is kind of a philosophical question, because you're right. The debate has become so polarized, and so sometimes I'm thinking about the Venn diagram, where you have two circles and the intersection.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm thinking about, now there are just two circles for every debate. You just have two circles next to each other, and there is no common space anymore. And so in a way, if you're outside of that circle, because you want to be objective, or you want to be scientific about things, you're immediately vilified by either circle or by the members of either circle, because you don't adopt their discourse and you don't adopt one or the other discourse. So I agree that in today's debate, it has become very difficult to be neutral or objective. Even like saying you're objective is already seen as suspicious, right? Oh, you're objective, you're with the other guys. And so it's more like a tribal landscape at the moment where each side vigorously defends their own points of view, but really lacks any empathy whatsoever. And I'm not saying that you should be empathetic towards the Israelis who bomb, who bomb Gaza like this, but neither should you be defending, like Hamas slaughtering civilians in Israel. I mean, I understand there is this idea of the occupation, and that's a really big problem and cause for a lot of pain for many people. But I remember in the early days when this happened, I was invited by a TV here in Switzerland, and I just tried to say these things, and immediately I got like shot at. Oh, you didn't say this, you didn't do that, yeah, this is kind of like a problem with that we have today. Also, if you look at the nature of debates on whoever you watch, like Pierce, Morgan, or like everywhere people are yelling at each other. They call each other liar. They call each other names. It's ad hominem attack after ad hominem attack. There is no arguments anymore. There is no rational conversation anymore. There is no civility anymore. I mean, it's really descending into complete madness. And also, even if there is some civility in terms of there is actually a debate, it is just about who has the better argument and who can say more things and more facts, and it's this ping pong, back and forth and blah blah. This say that. This say. It's kind of like you're getting ahead. I'm not going to say the word, but this is, this is like, that's the structure of the debate that we have today. It's about adopting a certain narrative. It's a highly ideologized and ideological debate. It's strongly linked to issues of identity, and it's therefore void of rationality, reason, and common sense.
Sir, I would really thank you for the privilege of your time. And one thing which I really want to say is that it's very, very difficult to start something of your own. And one of the reasons that I really find you inspiring is because you are actually a thought leader, because not only you started something of your own, but you also are trying to be a bridge between different worlds. And today you were a bridge for those who were watching from India specifically.
Thank you very much. It was a great honor to talk to you and to the students there. And I really hope to keep the conversation going, inshallah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.